The email arrived at 3:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, 6 hours and 13 minutes before Alexander Reed's $95,000 performance bonus was set to vest. He stared at the subject line, "Immediate termination, effective today." His coffee had gone cold an hour ago, untouched, sitting beside the mechanical keyboard he'd customized himself, each key soldered with precision, each switch chosen for its satisfying click that had soundtracked 3 years of 18-hour days. Alexander's hands trembled as he opened the message. The fluorescent lights of Titan Systems' fourth-floor engineering bay hummed overhead, that persistent electrical whine he'd learned to ignore somewhere around month 6. Around him, 73 other developers typed in concentrated silence, headphones on, monitors glowing with lines of code that kept a $400 million financial infrastructure running. "Mr. Reed," the email began, cold and corporate, "due to restructuring needs and performance concerns, your employment with Titan Systems is terminated effective 4 p.m. today. Please surrender all company property to HR immediately. Your final paycheck will be processed according to standard protocol. Bonuses are only paid to active employees." Performance concerns. The words felt like a slap. Alexander had built half the core systems that processed transactions for 847 banks across North America. He'd worked through holidays, weekends, his sister's wedding. He'd missed his father's 60th birthday to fix a critical bug that would have cost the company millions. His performance reviews had been stellar, 4 consecutive quarters of exceeds expectations. But bonuses are only paid to active employees. There it was. The real reason crystallized with brutal clarity. His desk phone rang. Extension 4501. Victoria Pierce. The VP who'd hired him, mentored him, promised him this bonus was guaranteed just 3 weeks ago over celebratory drinks. "Alexander, please come to conference room C." Her voice was clipped, professional, empty of the warmth he'd known. "Bring your badge and laptop." He stood slowly, legs unsteady. Around him, colleagues kept typing, but he caught sidelong glances, the subtle shift of attention that said they knew. News traveled fast in a building this size. Marcus, his cubicle neighbor and coffee-run partner for 2 years, wouldn't meet his eyes. The walk to conference room C felt longer than it should. Alexander's reflection caught in the glass walls. 31 years old, exhausted shadows under his eyes, a wrinkled button-down shirt he'd worn for 16 hours straight finishing the quarterly deployment. He looked like what he was, someone who'd given everything to a company that was about to throw him away for accounting convenience. Victoria sat at the head of the conference table, flanked by Harold Chen from HR and a security guard Alexander didn't recognize. The room smelled of artificial lemon cleaner and the faint cologne Harold always wore, something expensive and suffocating. "Sit down, Alexander," Victoria said, not looking at him, shuffling papers that probably said nothing important. "I'm remaining standing. You're firing me 6 hours before my bonus vests. The company is making strategic cuts. Strategic cuts." Alexander's laugh was bitter. "I built the transaction processing engine. I architected the failover systems that saved you $40 million last year during the server migration. I trained half your team." Harold cleared his throat, that rehearsed HR sound that preceded scripted nonsense. "Mr. Reed, your contributions are appreciated, but employment decisions are made based on current business needs. Which one is that exactly? The need to save $95,000 by firing me before midnight?" Victoria finally looked up. Her expression was stone, but something flickered in her eyes. Guilt, maybe, or just exhaustion from having this conversation with however many other people today. "Your laptop and badge, now." Alexander reached into his bag, pulled out the company laptop he'd babied for 3 years, never spilled coffee on, kept updated and clean. He set it on the table with deliberate care. His badge followed, that little plastic rectangle with his photo from day one, when he'd been excited, hopeful, stupid enough to think loyalty mattered. "The code," he said quietly. "The systems I built, they're complex." "We have documentation," Harold said quickly. Too quickly. Alexander smiled, and it wasn't kind. "Do you think so?" Victoria's eyes narrowed. "What does that mean?" "It means," Alexander said, picking up his messenger bag, "that documentation is only useful if it's complete, if it's accurate, if it includes all the little subsystems and fail-safes and custom solutions I built at 3 in the morning when everything was on fire and nobody else could fix it." The security guard stepped forward. Alexander raised his hands. "I'm going, don't worry." He turned toward the door, then paused. "Oh, one more thing. The bonus period ends at midnight, right? That's when the fiscal quarter officially closes?"
"That's correct," Harold said. "Good luck with the end-of-quarter processing," Alexander said. "I hear it's complicated." He walked out, the security guard following 3 steps behind, escorting him like a criminal through the office he'd helped build. Past Marcus, who finally looked up, mouthed, "I'm sorry." Past the break room where he'd eaten 1,000 lunches. Past the window overlooking downtown Seattle, the Space Needle visible in the distance, ferries crossing Elliott Bay in the late afternoon light. At the elevator, his personal phone buzzed. A text from Sarah, his friend from Quality Assurance. "WTF just happened." He typed back, "Corporate efficiency." The elevator doors closed. Alexander watched the numbers descend. 4, 3, 2, lobby. His reflection in the polished metal doors showed someone different than who'd arrived this morning. Someone who'd learned a hard lesson about trust. Outside, Seattle's October air hit him, cold and damp, carrying the smell of salt water and coffee from the shop 3 doors down. He stood on the sidewalk, surrounded by afternoon foot traffic, people rushing to meetings that mattered, jobs that valued them. His phone buzzed again. Marcus. "They just called an emergency meeting. Something about the systems. What did you do?" Alexander looked up at the Titan Systems building, glass and steel rising 14 stories, housing the infrastructure that moved billions of dollars every day. Somewhere in those servers, in the code he'd written, were pieces only he understood. Not because he'd been malicious, he'd never been malicious, but because complex systems grew organically, and documentation always lagged behind reality. And when you were the only person who understood something deeply enough, eventually it became yours alone. He texted back, "I didn't do anything. Yet." Alexander's apartment was 15 minutes away by bus, a modest 1-bedroom in Capitol Hill that cost too much and showed it in the perpetually dripping bathroom faucet and the heater that clanked like artillery fire. He dropped his bag by the door, slumped onto his second-hand couch, and stared at the ceiling where a water stain vaguely resembled South America. His phone kept buzzing. Sarah, Marcus, even Jennifer from DevOps, who he'd barely spoken to outside of technical discussions, all asking the same question. What was happening at Titan? He ignored them. Instead, he opened his laptop, his personal one, a sleek machine he'd built himself with parts carefully selected over months. The background was a photo from Mount Rainier, a hiking trip he'd taken alone last year because everyone else was too busy. He'd stood at the summit at dawn, watching the sun paint the world gold, and felt something like peace. That feeling seemed impossibly far away now. Alexander opened a terminal window, his fingers moving with muscle memory, typing commands that connected him to his personal server, a small box sitting in a data center in Portland. Nothing fancy, just his own space outside corporate control. He'd been careful over the years, ethical even in his paranoia. He'd never stolen code, never taken proprietary information, but he'd kept notes, detailed, comprehensive notes about every system he'd built, every workaround he'd implemented, every custom solution that wasn't quite documented. The Titan Systems architecture sprawled across his screen like a neural network, each node representing a critical component. Transaction processors, database clusters, API gateways, failover mechanisms, security layers. He'd touched almost all of it. The newer developers understood maybe 30%. The veterans, 50%. Victoria might understand 60% on a good day. Alexander understood 95%. And the missing 5%? That was the dangerous part. His phone rang. Unknown number. He answered. "Mr. Reed?" A woman's voice. Professional. Worried. "This is Catherine Wilkes, Director of Engineering at Titan. We need to talk. I don't work there anymore." "I understand you're upset." "Upset?" Alexander laughed. "I'm unemployed. There's a difference. The quarterly processing system is showing errors, critical errors. We've tried to trace them, but..." "But what?" Silence. Then, "We need your help." I don't work there anymore, Alexander repeated. You made that very clear at 3:47 p.m. We're prepared to offer compensation. For what? Helping the company that just fired me 6 hours before a $95,000 bonus? The company that had security escort me out like I'd stolen something? His voice rose. You want me to fix your problems? For what? A consulting fee? Maybe 5,000? 10? Name your price. Alexander sat up straighter. Catherine Wilkes had a reputation. Tough, smart, a survivor of 3 corporate restructurings. She wouldn't call unless things were genuinely bad. What's failing? He asked. The transaction validation system. It's rejecting legitimate transfers. We've already had 47 banks report issues. If we can't fix it before midnight, before the quarter closes, Alexander finished, before you have to report to the board and stakeholders that your systems are broken. Yes. How much will it cost you if it's not fixed? Catherine hesitated. Potentially hundreds of millions in penalties, lost contracts, reputation damage. Alexander looked at his notes, at the architecture diagram, at the small piece of code he'd written 2 years ago, a validation subroutine so deeply embedded in the transaction flow that removing it would require rebuilding half the system. He documented it, of course. He always documented. But the documentation was incomplete. Deliberately? No, he'd never been malicious, but he'd been interrupted, pulled to the next fire, the next crisis. The documentation had stayed incomplete, and he'd been the only one who knew the system well enough that it hadn't mattered. Until now. I want my bonus, the full $95,000, plus $200,000 in consulting fees, plus reinstatement with a formal apology from Victoria Pierce and Harold Chen, in writing. That's my price. Take it or figure it out yourselves. He hung up. His hands were shaking. He'd never been confrontational, never played hardball. He was the helpful one, the reliable one, the guy who fixed things quietly and never asked for recognition. But something had broken today, and he didn't recognize this version of himself who made demands, who weaponized knowledge. The phone rang again, immediately. Catherine. He let it go to voicemail. His laptop dinged with an email notification. Subject: Urgent, please respond. From Catherine, CCing Victoria Pierce and someone named David Rothman, who Alexander knew was the CFO. He opened it. The message was brief. We accept your terms. Please contact me immediately. Alexander read it 3 times. They'd accept it, just like that, which meant things were worse than Catherine had let on. He called back. Catherine answered on the first ring. Talk me through what's happening, he said. Within 20 minutes, Alexander was back in the Titan Systems building, though this time he walked through the front entrance with his head high. No security escort, no shame. Catherine Wilkes met him in the lobby personally, a woman in her 50s, with steel-gray hair and eyes that had seen too many corporate battles. Thank you for coming, she said, shaking his hand with genuine gratitude that felt surreal after the afternoon's events. I haven't fixed anything yet. They rode the elevator in silence. The 4th floor was chaos. Developers clustered around monitors, voices raised in frustration, the usual calm engineering environment replaced by panic. Alexander saw Victoria Pierce in her office through the glass walls, on the phone, gesturing sharply. Their eyes met briefly. She looked away first. The war room was conference room C, the same room they'd fired him 4 hours ago. Irony tasted bitter. Now it was filled with Titan's senior technical staff, Marcus, looking exhausted, Jennifer, typing frantically on her laptop, Tom Hargrove, the lead database architect, and half a dozen others Alexander knew by name and reputation. Okay, Catherine said, closing the door. Show them. Jennifer turned her laptop around. The screen showed a cascading series of error messages, transaction after transaction failing validation, each one representing thousands or millions of dollars stuck in digital limbo. Banks are calling, clients are panicking. The system that processed $400 million in daily transactions was hemorrhaging functionality. "Walk me through your troubleshooting," Alexander said, pulling up a chair. Tom spoke first. "The error started at 4:15 p.m., right after—" He stopped, glanced at Alexander. "After you left the building, the validation subroutine started rejecting transactions with error code VSE 4477. We checked the documentation, found your validation module, but when we tried to modify the parameters—" "It got worse," Alexander finished. "Much worse. We rolled back, but the errors continued. It's like the system is locked into a failure state." Alexander pulled out his personal laptop, connected to the Titan network with the emergency access Catherine had restored. He navigated to the validation system, pulling up code he'd written during a 72-hour crisis sprint 2 years ago, when the old validation system had proven vulnerable to fraud. There it was, the subroutine that checked transaction authenticity using a complex algorithm he'd designed, incorporating multiple data points, historical patterns, and real-time risk assessment. Beautiful code, elegant and efficient, and completely opaque to anyone who hadn't built it. "The error code," Alexander said slowly. "VSC 4477. What does that mean to you?" "Validation sequence error." "Wrong. It's specific. Very specific. It means the system detected an authentication mismatch in the administrative layer." He looked at Catherine. "Someone changed something in the admin configuration after I left. What was it?" Catherine and Tom exchanged glances. "We revoked your access credentials," Tom admitted. "Standard procedure for terminated employees. You didn't think the system would notice." Alexander leaned back. "But it did, because I built in a safeguard 2 years ago when we had that contractor try to sabotage the system. Remember that? The guy who got fired and tried to delete databases on his way out?" Catherine nodded slowly. "I remember. I built a dead man switch, not malicious, nothing that would harm data or functionality, but a check. If my administrative credentials were revoked without following proper decommissioning procedures, the validation system would enter a protected state. It's designed to prevent exactly what that contractor tried to do." The room fell silent. "How do we fix it?" Victoria Pierce stood in the doorway. Alexander hadn't heard her enter. She looked older than she had that morning, stress etched in the lines around her mouth. "You follow the proper decommissioning procedure," Alexander said, "which requires administrative access I no longer have, a 36-hour waiting period for security verification, and manual confirmation from 3 senior engineers who understand the system architecture well enough to verify no malicious code is present." 36 hours? Victoria's voice rose. "We have 8 hours until the quarter closes. We have clients screaming, regulators asking questions." "Then you should have thought about that before you fired me 6 hours before my bonus vested." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Victoria's face flushed. Catherine stepped between them. "There has to be another way," Catherine said carefully. "Alexander, you built the system. There must be a back door, an emergency override." "There is." Alexander opened a file on his laptop, showing a dense block of encrypted code. "It requires a key that only I have, and implementing it will take time. Several hours at least, maybe more." "Then start," Victoria snapped. "We agreed to your terms." "Did you?" Alexander looked at her directly. "Where's my reinstatement paperwork? Where's the written apology? Where's the formal agreement saying I get my bonus and the consulting fee?" Victoria's jaw tightened. "We'll have it drawn up." "Draw it up now." "I'll wait, because I'm not touching a single line of code until I have legal documentation that I'm not going to get screwed twice in one day." "This is extortion," Harold Chen said from the doorway. He had appeared like a bad omen, probably summoned by Victoria. "No,
This is employment negotiation. You terminated my contract. I'm offering to consult. These are my terms. Take them or don't.
Catherine put a hand on Harold's shoulder. Get legal on the phone. Now, draw up the paperwork. Harold left, muttering about precedent and liability. Victoria remained, arms crossed, radiating fury. Marcus caught Alexander's eye and gave a tiny nod of approval. Jennifer was trying not to smile. "You know," Victoria said, voice low and dangerous, "this could destroy your reputation. Nobody will hire someone who holds systems hostage." "I'm not holding anything hostage," Alexander replied. "Your system is failing because you fired the person who built it without proper transition procedures. That's not my fault. That's yours. I'm offering to fix your mistake for a price. That's called capitalism, Victoria. I thought you believed in that." The next 3 hours were a blur of paperwork, negotiations, and legal review. David Rothman, the CFO, got involved personally, his concern evident in how quickly he overrode Victoria's objections. The numbers Alexander was asking for were nothing compared to the losses Titan would face if the system stayed broken. At 9:47 p.m., Alexander had signed documents in front of him. Reinstatement effective immediately, back pay including the full bonus, $200,000 consulting fee for emergency services rendered, and a formal letter apologizing for administrative errors in the termination process. Victoria had signed it, though her signature looked like she'd tried to tear through the paper. "Satisfied?" she asked coldly. "Not even slightly," Alexander said, "but it's a start." He opened his laptop and began to work. The fix took 4 hours. Not because it was technically complicated, Alexander had built the override system to be accessible, but because he worked carefully, deliberately, checking every line of code, every system interaction. He wasn't going to give Titan any excuse to claim he'd sabotaged something or left a backdoor vulnerability. Marcus brought him coffee around midnight. "You're a legend," he whispered. "Half the office is taking bets on whether Victoria quits." "She won't," Alexander said, typing. "People like her never quit. They just find new targets." By 1:30 a.m., the transaction validation system was purring along smoothly, processing backlogged transactions, catching up on the evening's chaos. Banks reported systems normalizing. The error messages stopped. Catherine Wilkes physically sagged with relief when the monitoring dashboard turned green. "How did you do it?" Tom Hargrove asked, genuinely curious. "The deadman switch. How did it work?" Alexander explained the technical details, the elegant simplicity of a system that checked for administrative continuity, that required proper handoff procedures. It was never meant to be malicious. It was meant to protect the company from insider threats, from people who might try to sabotage things on their way out. "Ironic," Jennifer murmured, "that it ended up protecting you instead." "Not protecting. Ensuring fairness. There's a difference." Victoria appeared at 2 a.m. as Alexander was packing his laptop. The office had mostly emptied, just a skeleton crew monitoring the systems, making sure the fix held. "Can we talk?" she asked. Her voice was different now, tired, maybe even chastened. They went to her office. Through the windows, Seattle's downtown lights sparkled, the city that never quite slept. Victoria poured 2 glasses of water from the dispenser in the corner, handed one to Alexander. "I'm sorry. Really. It was a budget decision made above my head. I fought against it, but you sent the termination email. You called me to that conference room." "I did. Because I'm a coward. Because I thought if I made it quick, clinical, it would be easier. For me, not for you. I didn't think about you at all. I thought about protecting myself, my position."
I sipped the water. It tasted like nothing. Why fire me, specifically? Why not one of the newer developers, someone who cost less? Victoria looked at him for a long moment. Harold's idea. He said you were expensive, that your bonus represented a significant cost. He showed a spreadsheet to David, arguing that your functions could be distributed to cheaper resources. I said it was a mistake. David sided with Harold. And now? Now Harold is being asked to justify how a $95,000 savings almost cost us $400 million in losses. She laughed bitterly. Corporate Darwin at work. I don't feel sorry for him. You shouldn't. Victoria set her glass down. Alexander, I know I burned a bridge today. I know you'll probably leave anyway, bonus or not. But if you stay, I'll make sure this never happens again. I'll fight for you.
I am leaving, Alexander said quietly. Not today, not tomorrow, but soon. Because I learned something important this afternoon. Loyalty is a transaction here, and I can't build systems for people who see me as a line item on a budget spreadsheet. Victoria nodded slowly. I understand. For what it's worth, you're right, and I'm sorry. They sat in silence for a moment. Two people who'd worked together for 3 years, who'd built something significant, now sitting on opposite sides of a divide that couldn't be crossed again. The documentation, Alexander said finally. I'll spend the next 2 weeks creating comprehensive guides for every system I built. Training materials, video walkthroughs, everything you need so this never happens again. Thank you. Don't thank me. I'm doing it for Marcus, for Jennifer, for the people who have to maintain these systems after I'm gone. Not for you, not for Titan. He stood, shouldered his bag. At the door, he paused. One more thing, Victoria. The dead man switch, it's gone now. I removed it during the fix. So next time you want to fire someone to save money, you can do it without worrying about the systems crashing. You're welcome. He left her sitting in the dark office, staring at nothing. The next 3 weeks passed in a strange limbo. Alexander came to the office each day, spent hours documenting systems, training other developers, making himself obsolete with methodical precision. He was professional, thorough, even friendly. But something had changed. The other developers saw it, how he no longer stayed late, no longer volunteered for the impossible problems, no longer carried Titan's emergencies on his shoulders. His bonus arrived in his bank account, all $95,000, plus the $200,000 consulting fee. He stared at the numbers, feeling less triumph than he'd expected, just exhaustion. Sarah from QA invited him to lunch on his last day. They sat in the cafe 3 blocks from the office, the one with the good sandwiches and the barista who always got his order right. What will you do? She asked. I'm starting my own consulting firm. Small scale, working with companies that actually value their engineers. Setting my own terms. Good for you. She raised her coffee cup. To not be a line item. To not be a line item, he echoed. The final meeting with Catherine Wilkes was cordial. She thanked him for the documentation, assured him his references would be glowing, even offered to connect him with potential clients. You handled this with more grace than I would have. Most people would have burned it all down. I considered it, honestly. But destroying things is easy. Building is harder. And I'm a builder. He walked out of Titan Systems at 5 p.m. on a Friday, 3 weeks and 2 days after they'd tried to fire him. This time, no security escort. People waved, wished him luck. Marcus hugged him at the elevator and promised to keep in touch. Outside, November rain misted across Seattle, the city gray and beautiful in its melancholy. Alexander stood on the sidewalk, looking up at the building one last time, then walked toward the bus stop, toward whatever came next. His phone buzzed. An email from a startup in Portland. Saw your LinkedIn update. We're looking for a senior architect. Interested in talking? Alexander smiled and kept walking. 3 months later, Alexander's consulting firm, Reed Systems Architecture, occupied a small office in a renovated warehouse in Seattle's Georgetown neighborhood. Just him, a good coffee maker, and a whiteboard covered in diagrams. Clients came slowly at first, then faster. Word spread about the engineer who had stood up to corporate injustice and won. Victoria Pierce sent him a LinkedIn recommendation. He stared at it for a long time before accepting it. Marcus left Titan Systems and joined Alexander's firm. Then Jennifer. Then 3 others. They built careful, ethical systems for companies that valued expertise over expense. The work was rewarding. The pay was better. Nobody got fired 6 hours before their bonus vested. 3 years later, Alexander stood in front of 200 computer science students at the University of Washington, giving a guest lecture on professional ethics in engineering. Your code is power, he told them. Use it wisely. Document thoroughly. Never build systems so complex that only you understand them, not as leverage, but as professionalism. And remember, you're not a line item, you're a person. Act like it. The students applauded. Afterward, a young woman approached him. Mr. Reed, I heard about what happened at Titan Systems. Was it worth it, the fight? Alexander considered the question. He thought about the bonus, the vindication, the business he'd built, the respect he'd earned. He thought about the fear and anger and exhaustion of that terrible Tuesday. Yes, he said finally, because I learned who I was when it mattered, and that's worth more than any amount of money. 5 years later, Titan Systems had a new CEO, new culture, new policies protecting employee bonuses and ensuring proper transition procedures. They'd learned, slowly, expensively. Catherine Wilkes mentioned Alexander in her retirement speech, crediting him with helping to reform a broken system. Alexander watched the speech on YouTube from his office, now expanded to 2 floors and 20 employees. He thought about that day, that terrible and transformative day, and felt something like peace. His phone rang, a potential client. He answered with the professionalism that had always defined him, ready to build something new. Because that's what he did. He built. And this time, he built on his own terms.